The auctioneer's gavel was already rising when Claire Sutton walked through the door. She was 22 years old. Every man in that room turned to look at her, the way men look at something they've already decided doesn't belong. "Miss Sutton," Gerald Holt called out. He didn't bother to stand. "Glad you could make it to your own auction." "It's not an auction," Claire said. "Sutton Ranch is not for sale." The room laughed. Not all of them, but enough. A dozen ranchers and land speculators packed into the Millfield Courthouse, and most of them had already decided how this morning would end. "Your father left debts, sweetheart," Holt said, drawing out the last word like he was doing her a favor. "The bank has a legal right to recover what it is owed. Now you can stand there looking pretty, or you can sit down and let the grown men handle this." Claire's hands curled into fists inside her coat pockets. She had ridden 4 hours through pre-dawn cold to get here. She had spent 3 weeks going through her father's ledgers, learning numbers no one had ever taught her, trying to find a way out of a hole that kept getting deeper. She had not slept more than 4 hours in any single night since the funeral. And Gerald Holt was calling her sweetheart. "The debts are manageable," she said, stepping forward. "I have a repayment plan prepared. If the bank would simply. The bank has made its decision." Holt waved a hand. "Mr. Pierce, you may proceed." The auctioneer cleared his throat and lifted his gavel. The door at the back of the room opened. Nobody heard it over the noise, but Claire felt the shift. The way a room changes temperature when something significant enters it. Several men near the back turned first, then the ones in the middle, and the murmur of conversation died in a slow wave moving toward the front. She turned. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, wearing trail clothes that had seen serious work. Dust on his boots, dust on his coat, a jaw that had not seen a razor in several days. He was not the largest man in the room, but he carried himself like he was, and that made all the difference. He walked down the center aisle without hurrying. People moved out of his way without being asked. Claire had never seen him before in her life. He stopped at the front of the room, reached into his coat pocket, and set something on the auctioneer's table. A small metal badge, tarnished with age, the kind range riders carried to identify their authority over open grazing land. "Brian Calloway," he said. His voice was low and unhurried. "Range manager, Sutton Ranch, effective this morning." Holt's smile flickered. "The hell you are. Miss Sutton hired me last week." Brian did not look at Holt when he said it. He looked at the auctioneer. "Ranch has a working manager now. Debt restructuring is in progress. This auction has no legal standing." "That is a lie," Holt said louder now. "She never hired anyone. She does not even know how to." Careful. Brian turned to look at Holt then, and something in that single word made the room go very quiet. "Finish that sentence carefully." Holt finished it anyway. He was that kind of man. "She does not know how to run a cattle operation. She is a child playing at ranching. Her father barely kept that place alive, and she has no business, Mr. Holt." Brian's voice had not risen at all. "I have ridden for 6 different outfits in 20 years. I have managed herds from Texas to Oregon. I have never worked for a ranch that failed under my watch." He picked up the badge from the table and turned it over in his fingers. "Sutton Ranch will not be the first." He looked at the auctioneer again. "We are done here." The gavel did not fall. Claire caught up with him outside, where he was untying a gray horse from the post with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had somewhere to be. "You lied," she said. "I did." He did not seem troubled by this. "I did not hire you." "No." He checked the cinch on his saddle. "But Holt does not know that, and neither does the auctioneer, and by the time anyone thinks to verify it, you will have had time to actually hire me." He glanced at her. "If you want to." Claire stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "You do not know me." "I knew your father." He said it simply, without sentiment. Rode with him on the Cimarron Drive in 1879. He was a fair man and a good cattleman. He did not deserve to die with his land going to Gerald Holt. The morning wind came down off the hills and cut through her coat. Claire had been holding herself together for 3 weeks through sheer stubbornness, and something about the plainness of what he had just said made her throat tighten in a way she refused to show. "I cannot pay you much," she said. "I know. The ranch is in bad shape. The hands my father had are gone. The north fence line is down in 3 places. I have 900 head of cattle and no clear idea where half of them are." "I know that too." He put his foot in the stirrup. "I rode your land yesterday before I came here. Wanted to see what I was walking into." Claire blinked. "You scouted my ranch without asking." "Yes." "That is," she stopped, took a breath. I expected it to be a guess. It is not a guess. You did the work. He turned and kept walking. Come on. We have fence to assess before dark. The two hands Brian sent for arrived 3 days later. Older men, quiet and competent, who looked at Claire with neutral eyes and waited to see what she would do before they decided what to think of her. She had learned, in those 3 days, that Brian Calloway taught by doing and expected you to keep up. He did not explain things twice. He did not soften corrections. When she made a mistake reading the terrain on the first day of searching for strays, he said, "Wrong. Look again," and waited while she figured out where she had gone wrong. When she found the answer herself, he said nothing, just moved forward. It was infuriating, and she was beginning to understand exactly what she needed. They found the strays on the 3rd day, tucked into a draw on the north ridge exactly where Brian had predicted. Getting them back down was a full day's work, the 4 of them riding hard through rough country, and by the time the cattle were back in the south pasture, Claire's legs ached and her hands were raw from the rope work. She did not say any of this. Brian noticed anyway. That evening at the campfire, he handed her a tin of salve without comment. She looked at it, looked at him. "Your hands," he said. "They are fine. They will be worse tomorrow if you do not use that." She used the salve. He went back to checking the saddle he had been repairing, his hands moving with the automatic precision of long practice. The fire cracked between them. The two hands had already turned in for the night. "Why did you really come back?" Claire asked. "To the courthouse. You said you knew my father, but that was years ago. You did not owe him anything." Brian was quiet for a moment, working the leather. "I was in Millfield 2 weeks ago. Heard Holt talking in the saloon about how he was going to pick up Sutton land for nothing, because the daughter did not know what she was doing." He paused. "He was laughing about it. And that bothered you. Men who laugh at people trying to survive bother me." He set down the saddle. "Your father pulled me out of a bad situation once. Long time ago. I never got the chance to repay it." He looked at the fire. This seemed like the time. Claire thought about that. About debts and repayment. And the way kindness moved through time, in ways you could not always predict. "I am going to make this work," she said. Not asking for reassurance. Just stating it. "I know," Brian said. That night, the storm came. It hit without warning around midnight, rain coming down in sheets, wind rattling the barn doors. Claire was already awake. She rarely slept through the night anymore, and she heard the sound before she understood what it was. A cow lowing in distress. Not the usual nighttime calls. Something was wrong. She pulled on her boots and her father's old coat and ran out into the rain. Brian was already at the corral, saddle in hand. He didn't ask why she was there. He just looked at her and nodded once. "North pasture," he said. "Calf got through the fence. Mother went after it. They're stuck in the wash." "How do you know?" "Heard it from my bunk." "You getting on that horse or not?" She got on the horse. They rode through the dark with no light, but the occasional flash of lightning. The rain soaked through Claire's coat in minutes, plastered her hair to her face, made the ground treacherous beneath them. She could barely see Brian ahead of her, just the shape of him, the way he kept moving forward without hesitation. They found the cow at the bottom of a dry wash that had become a rushing stream. The calf was trapped against a fallen log, and the mother stood over it, bawling, unwilling to leave but unable to pull it free. Brian dismounted before Claire could say anything. The water was up to his knees. "Stay with the horses," he shouted over the rain. "No." She was already off her horse. He turned to look at her. Something crossed his face, anger, maybe, or fear, or something in between. "Claire, this water is rising. If you fall in, I can't. Then don't let me fall." She stepped into the water beside him. For a moment, he just looked at her. Then he grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with a grip that left no room for argument. "Stay behind me. And if I tell you to go back to the horses, you go. Understand?" "I understand." They moved through the water together, step by careful step. The rain kept coming. The lightning lit up the canyon walls like daylight, then plunged them back into darkness. Claire could feel Brian's hand at her back, steadying her, guiding her. He didn't say another word. The calf was wedged tight. Brian wrapped his arms around it and pulled, and the animal cried out, and Claire saw something in Brian's face that she had never seen before. Desperation. The kind that came from somewhere deep, somewhere personal. "Push from your legs," she said. "Not your back." He looked at her. "I've pulled calves before," she said. "On my father's ranch. Push from your legs." He adjusted his stance. Pulled again. The calf came free. They got the calf up the bank and onto solid ground. The mother followed, still bawling, but quieter now. Claire was shaking from the cold, her teeth chattering, her hands so numb she couldn't feel the reins. Brian tied the calf to his saddle, then walked over to her. He didn't say anything. He just took off his coat, his only dry layer, and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You're going to freeze," she said. "I've been colder." "That's not, Claire." His voice was rough. "Just wear the coat." She wore the coat. They rode back in silence, the storm beginning to ease. By the time they reached the ranch, the rain had turned to drizzle, and the sky was starting to lighten in the east. Brian helped her down from her horse. His hands lingered at her waist for a moment longer than necessary, and then he stepped back. "You didn't have to come out there," he said. "I know. You could have been hurt. So could you." He looked at her for a long moment. The rain had stopped. The first gray light of dawn was touching the hills. "Your father used to tell me you were stubborn," Brian said quietly. "He didn't mention you were also reckless. He didn't know everything about me." "No," Brian agreed. "He didn't." Something hung in the air between them. Not quite tension. Not quite understanding. Something in between. Claire pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders. "I'm keeping this until morning." "I figured." She walked toward the house. Before she went inside, she turned back. He was still standing where she'd left him, watching her. "Brian. Thank you. For not leaving me behind." He didn't answer. But he didn't look away either. She went inside, and the door closed behind her, and the first light of dawn spread across the valley. Gerald Holt did not give up. 2 weeks after the courthouse, one of the south pasture fences was cut in the night. 30 head of cattle wandered onto Holt's adjacent land, and Holt's men had them penned before dawn, claiming they had strayed onto his property, and he had a right to hold them pending a boundary dispute. Claire rode to Holt's ranch alone. She knew Brian would have come with her. She did not ask him to. Holt met her at his gate with 3 of his men behind him and that same red-faced smile. "Miss Sutton, come to negotiate." "Come to collect my cattle," she said. "The fence was cut. I have the evidence. You have until tomorrow morning to return them, or I will be at the sheriff's office with what I found." Holt's smile did not waver. "That is a serious accusation. It is a serious crime." She held his gaze. "Tomorrow morning, Mr. Holt." She rode back without looking behind her. The cattle were returned before dawn. Brian was at the corral when she came out to check, counting heads in the gray morning light. He looked at her when she appeared. "You went alone," he said. "Yes." A pause. "How did it go?" He backed down. Brian turned back to the cattle. "Good." That was all he said. But something in the set of his shoulders had changed, and Claire understood, without either of them naming it, that something had shifted between them. She had passed a test she had not known she was taking. The Millfield Annual Trade Fair came in October, when the air had turned sharp and the hills had gone gold and brown. Every rancher in the county brought their best cattle, and the prizes awarded there carried real weight, the kind that affected prices and reputations for the following year. Claire had entered Sutton Ranch's breeding stock in the main cattle competition. The town knew it. The town had opinions about it. She heard them in the general store when she came in for supplies. 2 women near the fabric bolts, speaking just loud enough to be heard. "Bless her heart, she is trying." And the other one, quieter but not quiet enough. "Her father could barely manage that place. What does she think she is going to do?" Claire set her list on the counter and did not look at them. Mrs. Aldridge behind the counter gave her a sympathetic look that Claire did not want either. "I will take everything on that list," Claire said, "and I will need it loaded by noon." She walked out before anyone could say anything else. Brian was waiting with the wagon. He looked at her face when she came out. "What happened?" "Nothing." She climbed up. "Let's go." He did not push. They rode in silence for a while, the town falling behind them, the road opening up into the wide country she was learning to love. "They do not think I can do it," she said finally. "No," Brian agreed. "Does that bother you?" He considered the question with the seriousness he gave everything. "What bothers me is when people are wrong and they are loud about it." He kept his eyes on the road. They will be quiet soon enough. The morning of the trade fair, Claire was up before the sun. She had spent the previous week preparing her entries with a focus that left no room for doubt. Brian had worked alongside her, saying little, correcting when necessary, and she had learned to read his silences the way she was learning to read the land. His silence when she did something right felt different from his silence when he was waiting for her to figure out her mistake. The fairgrounds were crowded by mid-morning. Ranchers from across the county, their families, merchants, and the kind of men who came to watch and make deals. Claire moved through the crowd with her notebook, checking on her entries, noting the competition. She was aware of the looks, the whispers that followed her, the way conversations paused when she approached and resumed when she passed. Holt was there, of course. He had entered cattle too, and he made a point of walking past her entries with his men, speaking loudly about the importance of experience in cattle management. Brian appeared at her shoulder without her hearing him approach. "Ignore him," he said quietly. "I am ignoring him. You are gripping that notebook hard enough to bend it." She loosened her grip. "Better, better." The judging took most of the afternoon. Claire stood with the other ranchers and waited, watching the judges move through the pens with their clipboards, and she thought about her father, who had stood in this same place for 20 years and never won this prize. She thought about the courthouse and the cut fence and the women in the general store. She thought about Brian, who had walked into a room full of men who had already decided the outcome and changed it with nothing but presence and certainty. The head judge climbed onto the platform as the sun began to lower. He read through the category winners in order, building toward the main prize. Claire heard her name for the breeding stock category and walked forward to collect the ribbon, and the applause was polite, the kind given to someone people are surprised by. Then the judge reached the final award. Best overall cattle operation, the prize that mattered most. "Sutton Ranch," he said. The applause started slowly. Then it grew. Claire walked to the platform and took the award, and she turned to face the crowd, and she found Brian immediately. He was standing at the edge of the gathering, apart from the others, and when her eyes found his, he reached up and removed his hat. He held it against his chest and gave her a single, slow nod. It was not a small gesture from a man like Brian Calloway. The people around him saw it. Several of them turned to look at her again, recalibrating. Claire felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for months. The dance that evening was held in the fairground's main hall, lanterns strung from the rafters, a fiddle and a guitar playing in the corner. Claire had not planned to stay. She had work in the morning, and she was tired in the deep way that came from months of sustained effort. But she stayed. She stood near the edge of the room, watching the dancing, holding a cup of cider she was not drinking. Several men asked her to dance. She declined politely. She was not sure what she was waiting for until she saw Brian come through the door. He had cleaned up. The trail dust was gone, his coat was brushed, and he had shaved. He looked different and exactly the same, and he stood in the doorway for a moment scanning the room until he found her. He crossed toward her without stopping to speak to anyone. "You stayed," he said. "So did you." He looked at the dancers. "I do not usually come to these things. Why did you tonight?" He was quiet for a moment. The fiddle started a new song, slower than the last. "I wanted to see how the evening ended," he said. Claire set down her cider cup. She turned to face him fully, and she held out her hand. "Dance with me," she said. Brian looked at her hand. Then he looked at her face. Something moved through his expression, something she had been watching for without knowing it, the careful restraint finally giving way to something simpler and truer. He took her hand. They moved onto the floor, and the room noticed. She felt it, the way conversations paused, the way people turned. The ranchers who had laughed at the courthouse. The women from the general store. Gerald Holt, standing near the far wall with a drink in his hand and an expression that had finally lost its smile. Brian danced the way he did everything, with quiet competence and complete attention. His hand was warm at her back. He did not look at the crowd. "They are all watching," she said. "Let them watch," he said. She laughed, and it surprised her, the ease of it. "You are not bothered at all. I stopped caring what rooms thought of me a long time ago." His eyes were on her face. "I care what you think." The music moved around them. The lanterns swayed slightly in the draft from the open door. "I think," Claire said carefully, "that you walked into a courthouse 6 months ago and changed everything. And I have been trying to figure out how to thank you for that." "You do not need to thank me." "I know. That is not what I am saying." She met his eyes. "I am saying that I am glad you came. Not just for the ranch. For all of it." Brian was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet she had learned to read. "I am glad I came too," he said. The winter that followed was hard. A cold snap in December froze the creek and pushed the cattle down from the upper pastures, and they lost 2 weeks of grazing to ice and mud. Claire and Brian and the two hands worked through it, breaking ice at the water troughs every morning before dawn, moving cattle to sheltered ground, patching the barn roof when a section gave way under the weight of snow. It was miserable work, and Claire did every bit of it. There was a morning in January when she was breaking ice at the North Trough, her hands numb despite her gloves, and Brian appeared beside her and took the axe without a word and finished the job. She stood back and watched him work, and she thought about the courthouse again, about the way he had set that badge on the table and changed the direction of her life. "Brian," she said. He kept working. When this is over, when the debt is paid and the ranch is stable." She paused. "What do you want?" He stopped, set the axe down, turned to look at her in the gray winter light. "What do you mean?" "You came here for my father's sake. You stayed because the work needed doing." She held his gaze. "But what do you want?" "For yourself." He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he might not answer. "I have been moving from outfit to outfit for 20 years, he said finally. Never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. Never had a reason to. He looked at the frozen creek, the snow-covered hills, the ranch that was slowly, stubbornly becoming something real. "I have a reason now." Claire felt the warmth of that settle into her chest against the cold. "Then stay," she said. He looked at her. "Claire, stay. Not as my range manager. Not because you owed my father something." She took a breath. "Stay because this is yours too. Because you helped build it and you belong here." A pause. "Because I want you here." The wind moved through the bare trees along the creek. A cow lowed somewhere in the distance. Brian crossed the distance between them in 2 steps and kissed her, and it was nothing like the careful restraint of the past months. It was honest and certain and warm against the January cold. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. "I am not easy to live with," he said. "I noticed. I do not talk enough. I have enough words for both of us." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. She felt it more than heard it. "I will stay," he said. Spring came slowly and then all at once, the way it does in that country. The creek thawed and ran high and clear. The cattle moved back to the upper pastures. The south pasture fence, rebuilt over the winter, held solid. Claire paid off the last of the bank debt in April. She rode to the bank herself, set the final payment on the desk of the loan officer, who had signed off on Holt's auction attempt, and watched him write the receipt. "Sutton Ranch is clear," he said, with the slightly stunned expression of a man whose prediction had been wrong. "Yes," Claire said. "It is." She rode home through the spring afternoon, the hills green and the sky enormous above her, and she thought about her father, who had loved this land and struggled with it, and left it to her because there was no one else. She thought about what it had cost to keep it, and what it had given her in return. Brian was at the corral when she rode in, working with a young horse that had been giving them trouble. He looked up when she came through the gate. She held up the receipt. He set down the lead rope, walked over, and took it from her hand. "Read it." Looked up. "Done," she said. He folded the receipt carefully and handed it back. Then he put his hands on either side of her face and kissed her in the middle of the yard in the full afternoon light, where anyone riding past could see. She kissed him back. They married in June, in the small church in Millfield, with the 2 ranch hands as witnesses and Mrs. Aldridge from the general store crying in the front pew despite herself. The town came, most of it, because the story of Claire Sutton and the courthouse and the trade fair prize had become the kind of story a town tells about itself. Gerald Holt did not come. No one mentioned him. Brian stood at the front of the church in a clean coat with his hat in his hands, and when Claire came through the door, he looked at her the way he had looked at her that first morning in the courthouse, with the same steady attention, except now there was nothing held back in it. She walked toward him and thought, this is what it looks like when someone sees you clearly and chooses you anyway. The ceremony was short. The words were simple. Outside, the June sun fell on the valley and the hills and the ranch in the distance, solid and real in theirs. Years later, when people asked Claire Sutton Calloway how she had saved her father's ranch, she told the story plainly. The debts, the courthouse, the man who had walked in and set a tarnished badge on a table and changed everything. She always said the same thing at the end. He did not save me, she would say. He stood beside me while I saved it myself. There is a difference, and he knew the difference, which is why it worked. Brian, if he was present for this telling, never added anything. He did not need to. The ranch spoke for itself. The cattle on the hills, the repaired fences, the house with smoke rising from the chimney. The life built from stubbornness and hard work and 2 people who had decided, in the middle of a frozen January morning, that they had a reason to stay. That was enough. That was everything.